All right, hello again, Ling 201. Today we are going to continue our discussion of morphology, and in particular, we're going to learn how to draw trees of morphological structure, trees of the morphological structure of complex words. So it's a pretty clear task we have ahead of us. We just kind of have to learn how to do it. So just to review, in our last episode, actually before I review, I'll remind you, before I forget myself, that there's a quick write for this particular class. We're probably not going to talk about your answers to this quick write in this lecture itself, but in the next lecture it will become relevant. So this particular quick write is about linguistic creativity and pronouns, which still, I guess, a bit of a hot topic. So why don't you read through this, give me a response, depending on what your opinion is about this and what you know, and then we'll kind of go over it next time before we walk through the rest of what we have to say about morphology. Okay, so in the meantime, though, we're going to talk about how to represent morphological structure. And why are we doing this? Because we have learned that words can be made up out of different parts called morphemes, which may not be able to stand on their own, but have some sort of meaning or function when they attach to other words or morphemes. And therefore, we have a concept of free versus bound morphemes. Free morphemes are ones that can stand on their own. Bound morphemes have to attach to something else. Then we also have simple versus complex words. So, like, to give you a couple examples of both of these, word is a free morpheme, and it's a simple morpheme when it's by itself. When you add this plural affix s to it, it becomes a complex word because there's more than one morpheme in it. And the plural suffix s itself is a bound morpheme because it has to attach to something else. We don't have just a single word in English that means plural. There's also affixes and roots, which is kind of where we left off. So I already mentioned, like, if you have a word like words, then the S is an affix and the word is a root. And then in order to put those things together, you have to use a word formation rule. So affixes attached to a root, usually of a particular lexical category, to create a new word. That's generally speaking how the word formation rules are formalized when we try to write them out. So this is the last slide we saw last time, where I also kind of walk you through the distinction between roots and stems, or roots and bases. So we had a word like boyishness, which has 3 morphemes in it. So you start with a root boy, which is a noun, and then you can add ish to it, which is a suffix, so you get boyish, which is an adjective. You can take that boyish and add ness to it, but when you create another word out of this combination, the boyish is considered what's called a base rather than a root because it's already a complex word. There's already another morpheme attached to the root here. So you can still add ness to it. That takes an adjective boyish and makes it a noun, meaning the quality of being boyish. So boyishness. Can't believe I said that correct every single time I tried. So I'm going to stop there for that one. And then also mention we have the word blackened. I'm not going to walk through that one again. But just again, there's a subtle distinction here between a root and a base is sometimes called a stem. Why am I talking about this? Well, in part, I need to kind of draw your attention to the issue or the concept of lexical categories, which in English class you might have learned as parts of speech. So word building takes place in stages because specific affixes are particular about what kind of words they attach to. So when I was walking you through these 2 examples here, I wasn't just adding 2 affixes all at once to one single root. Instead, you add one suffix to the root and then form a base, and then you add another suffix to it. So there's 2 stages here, or I describe it as 2 rounds. It kind of amounts to the same thing. What's going on here is that the affixes have to attach to specific kinds of words. And for this, we need to know about what these kinds of words are. And like I said, we're going to call them lexical categories. So yeah, hopefully these sound relatively familiar, but if they don't, here's your chance to get a quick and dirty review of them, or a quick and dirty introduction to them, I guess, instead. So maybe the first one that comes to mind, or that maybe you learn, is the category of nouns. So those are described semantically as people, places, and things. Semantically just means this is what they mean in the world. They can also have what's called a syntactic function, which is just how they can kind of be ordered in a sentence with respect to other types of words. I'm not going to get into that yet, but some examples of nouns are like dog, cat, bike, person, planet, ball, etc. These are all pretty concrete nouns. There are also abstract ones, which are kind of harder to sort of, I guess, maybe visualize because they're nouns like word or category or review, so on and so forth. These are obviously very common words in the language because we find them in every single sentence, basically. Some nouns would be more frequent than others, but yeah, you should be aware of this category. There's also verbs, which kind of counterbalance nouns in a way because these are about things that happen, so actions or sensations or states as well, rather than the things that are happening. These are sort of the events or descriptions of what relationships you see between different nouns. So we have verbs like run, kick, scratch, scream, bite, walk, be, have, etc. And again, some of these are kind of more concrete or more, easy to conceive of than others. I'm trying to think. So like know is another verb up here. Yeah, there's some complex ones here. So like attach is another verb, along with be and have, which are very common verbs. Yeah, so these are kind of our fundamental building blocks of sentences, nouns and verbs. Be on the lookout for them. Number 3 that I'll mention is adjectives. So semantically, these are properties or qualities, usually properties or qualities of a noun. So words like happy, sad, angry, funny, clear, fuzzy, ugly, so on and so forth. I don't think I have as many examples of adjectives in this previous slide. Yeah, I actually can. Yeah, like quick and dirty, I guess, are examples of adjectives. Category number 4 is prepositions, and I want to kind of pause on this one for a bit because usually this is the category that people seem to have the most trouble with. So these are funny little words which are kind of hard to think of in terms of their meaning just by themselves because they're always kind of describing relationships between sort of different elements of a sentence. So these are not, for the most part, going to come into play that much when we do morphological trees because they can't really function as roots, generally speaking, in the same way as these other categories can, but you still need to know them. So these are little words like to, for, of, with, out, so on and so forth, above, below, like, my head is above my body or something like that. I can pick up the glass with my hand, so on and so forth. There is water in the glass. All these are little relationship words called prepositions. Another way to think about them is that you can kind of break down the word itself morphologically, as it were, and say this is preposition. So these are words that come before a noun usually and describe that noun's position with something else. So the water is in the glass. So it describes sort of the relationship in terms of space between the water and the glass. In, that's a preposition. If I toss the water out of the glass, then I'm using out or out of as a preposition. So watch out for these, get to know them. I will also say there are some languages out there which actually put these words after the noun that they describe a relationship for. And in that case, if the preposition comes after the noun, then it's called a postposition. Haha. We don't have those really in English, but you may know another language which does. So just watch out for that. I guess these things can sort of be placed in different positions in a sentence based on how the syntactic rules of that language happen to work. There are options out there, in other words. Also, there are adverbs. So semantically, these are like adjectives in that they describe properties or qualities, but usually these are applied to verbs or adjectives, whereas the adjectives describe properties or qualities of a noun. Most of these adverbs are going to end in the word ly, and generally speaking, you can kind of create one by taking an adjective like rare and then adding ly to it, like rarely, purely, frequently, so on and so forth. There's a few other ones which don't have that ending, like often and seldom, but they will also describe sort of the quality of some verb or, adjective, like often dirty or, often attached to a preposition or something like that. Yeah, so those are our 5 basic categories. If that didn't make a whole lot of sense, you can walk through these slides again, or again, go to those Schoolhouse Rock videos. They're useful, even though they might be a bit childish. But you need to know this stuff in order to be able to do these exercises. Okay, we'll talk about them all again when we get the syntax as another review, but for the meantime, let's do a brief sort of quiz, or I guess another set of practice exercises. So I'm going to give you sets of words, each of which are sort of using or involving the same affix in multiple examples. And I want you to tell me what the affixes are that are attaching to the roots in each of the words, and then also what lexical categories do those affixes attach to. So normally, this is a bit awkward because normally I do this on the board in class and we can kind of walk through it together as a group, a big group of like 100 students. And in 100 students, there's usually enough people who are confident enough and willing enough to speak out in class to figure out what the answer is. I don't know exactly how it's going to work when we do this online. So I'm going to walk you through these sets first, and you can think about them, and then I'll try to kind of just basically sketch out the answers. Also, like, what lexical categories are formed by adding the affix. So there's three things we have to think about. What are the affixes? What lexical categories do those affixes attach to? And what lexical categories do they form when they create a new word? And if we know all those three things, we can basically come up with a description of the word formation rule that's in play for each of these sets of words. Okay, so the first set is uncertain, unhappy, untrue. The second set is exactly, profoundly, and deeply. The third set is moralize, vandalize, and sermonize. And the last set is deconstruct, decode, and derail. So I'm actually going to try to type out the answers here, I guess, in the slide. So I'll probably run out of room here really quickly, and I won't post these either. But for those of you watching the video, you'll get a little bit of a bonus. So maybe I'll put this in italics or something. So this is the affix un. Hopefully you can see that. It's in every single one of these. And it is attaching to the words certain, happy, and true. So certain, happy, and true, those are adjectives that describe qualities of things, like that was an uncertain time when we had to live with the coronavirus. And if you add on to those adjectives, you create another adjective. So certain is an adjective and uncertain is an adjective. The boy might be happy, the girl might be unhappy. Those are both adjectives describing kind of their state of mind or their emotions. The next one, hopefully you can see this. I don't know where that came from, but we have a suffix in this case, ly, and I kind of gave away the game on this one because I talked about it in the previous slide, but this is a suffix which can attach to adjectives and create adverbs. So exact is an adjective. If we add ly to it, then we get an adverb. Profound is an adjective. Deep, like the ocean is deep. He thought very deeply, I guess. I don't know. Is an adverb, which describes, an action or a verb of some sort. Moralize, vandalize, sermonize. Again, hopefully it's getting a little bit easier. You just pick out kind of the parts of these which get repeated in the pattern to find the affix at work. That happened again. Stop doing that, please. Moralize, vandalize, sermonize. So this one might be a little bit trickier. I think maybe out of these three, vandalize might be the most common of these words. Vandalize, what kind of word is that? Like you can vandalize the train station by breaking some windows and spraying graffiti all over everything. That's a verb, right? It's something you can do, is you can vandalize something. But if you are somebody who vandalizes things, that would make you a vandal. And there is a story about that word from ancient history, which I don't know if I really need to get into, but Vandals were a tribe of people. I think they were from the Mediterranean era. I don't know. But they were against the Roman Empire back in the day when it was falling apart. Anyways, so a Vandal is a specific person or a type of person, And if you vandalize something, that's a verb. So you add "ize" to a noun and it becomes a verb. Sermon is a noun, and when you sermonize, that's a type of like speaking. That's a verb itself as well. Didn't anticipate that, doesn't matter. The last one, hopefully you can see we're adding this little bit "d" at the beginning, so it's a prefix. And what are these other words? Construct, code, and rail. Not all these are obvious, I guess, in terms of what their lexical category might be. So specific strings of sounds may form words which can take one or more different lexical categories. So code is a noun when you think about like a code which you have to use to translate one message into another or something like that. Or you could code something, which is kind of a fancy word for saying like programming a computer. When you decode something, you kind of undo the code, right? To figure out what the original means without the code and sort of obfuscating it. Yeah, so this one might not be quite as easy to see, but you are adding "d" to a verb to get another verb. You can construct something, you can deconstruct something, like take it apart, that sort of thing. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that. But this is basically how you answer these questions, right? So we've got different, I guess they weren't all in italics, but you've got different affixes attaching to words of specific lexical categories and creating complex words of specific lexical categories as a result of that application. Okay, so that's how the word formation rules work at a basic level. What we want to also be able to do on top of describing those rules is to show what kind of structure they create. So words that are formed through the addition of multiple affixes have a layered or hierarchical structure. And we're going to see this a lot in this class. So I'm going to show you one way to represent it, which you may see elsewhere, including when we do syntax. But it's not a preferable way of representing these things because it's kind of hard to read, and it doesn't really look beautiful either. But let's say we have a root like construct. We can add the affix or the prefix "re" to it to mean to construct, again, reconstruct. And then we can talk about reconstruction like in the Old South after the Civil War in the 1800s. So reconstruction, there's three morphemes coming together here in this one complex word. And I'm saying that what you're doing here is that you are adding the "re" to the construct first. So initially you just have brackets around your root, and I'm also placing brackets around my affixes here. But then to sort of signify that these two guys attach first, I'm putting brackets around them before I add another morpheme to them, the ION. So like I said, this is not easy to read. A computer could pick it apart pretty easily, and this is how we like submit instructions to a computer if you ever want to do that. Maybe not. But these brackets are kind of more tightly bracketing this pair of morphemes, and then you add this one afterwards. So this reconstruct becomes a base to which you add another affix. The root word, again, the output word is reconstruction. I guess I'll mention in passing, you might feel tempted to kind of try to, deconstruct the word construct itself, but this just has one morpheme in it, even though it might look like there's like a con that you can split off here at the front. You can't really do that. The bigger question is, how can we represent this in a way that's easier to read and understand? In order to do that, we're going to create what we're calling tree structures or tree diagrams. And so I'll give you the example for reconstruction here without sort of labeling everything. But again, when you create the word reconstruction, or its structure itself is that re is more tightly bound to construct, then ION is bound to the whole thing. So you kind of have to put these two together first. And the way we represent that is that these two morphemes kind of point up to a shared node in a tree, which is this point. And then after those come together, you add the ION to get a higher level structure, combining the whole thing together. I've got undesirable here. This one's a little bit funny, but this one, the way it's showing it to you is that desire attaches to a bowl first, so you get desirable as a word, and then you add un to it afterwards to get undesirable. I'll say a little bit more about this structure, though, in a minute. I'll give you the terminology here before we go to a few more examples. So these are called trees. Hopefully it's obvious why. I guess they're kind of upside down trees because most trees, branch out at the top. But here's our root. So try not to think too hard about that and just think about the tree part of it having splitting branches or branches splitting off. So these are the branches of the tree, these individual lines pointing to the different morphemes. A node is where two branches meet, and nodes represent what we call constituents of the word. So the constituents of the whole word have to be words themselves, or it could be words themselves if you split off the other morphemes away from them. So reconstruct can be a word by itself if you take ION away from it. While reconstruction is a word too because they all come together at this node at the top. Okay, so I'll reiterate this point because we're going to have to start incorporating this information into our tree diagrams, but affixes generally attach to a base with a particular lexical category. So we've seen a few examples before, but say this prefix re, you can add it to a verb to create another verb, and you don't, it's not always obvious what these things are going to mean, but in this particular case, it's pretty easy to think of. It means to do something again. So use, you can reuse something, which means that you use it again. Cycle is a little more opaque in terms of its meaning, but you can say cycle, like to put something through a cycle, like turn your computer off and on again. And then you can recycle it again, which again, it means a little something different, like Lisa Simpson's version of recycling, but it's the same sort of structure underlyingly. This is a verb, you add re to it to create another verb to do it again. Adjective, another example of this, you can add the prefix into it to create an adjective, which basically means the opposite of the original adjective. So you may feel secure, somebody else might feel insecure. When they do, they feel the opposite of being secure, right? Something can be complete, like a puzzle, and then if it's incomplete, then there are still a few pieces missing, right? It's just the opposite. This is how the rule works. Noun, an example of that, another prefix, you can add x to a noun, which means the former version of that noun. So you may have a wife, or you might have an ex-wife, somebody who used to be your wife. You can have a president or an ex-president, somebody who used to be the president, so on and so forth. All of these prefixes are getting specific about what kind of nouns or what kind of words they can attach to in terms of their lexical category, and then what kind of lexical category they create out of that process. Other affixes attach to a base of a particular lexical category and create a word of a different lexical category. And we saw an example like this with the Mitch Hedberg clip. It didn't make it through to YouTube, but hopefully you followed the link because that's at least 20 seconds of mild humor to brighten your day. So you can talk about toaster, which is something that creates toast. So toast is a, okay. Let's go with teach. This one's a little bit ambiguous. A teacher is somebody who teaches. So teach is a verb. Teacher is a noun. To create the word teacher, you add to teach, which is a verb, so it follows this pattern. A noun is a verb plus er. Speak, speaker, so on and so forth. You can create a verb by adding the suffix n to adjective. So we saw this before with blacken. Black is an adjective. Add n to it, you get blacken or freshen. And adding n to fresh. There's not a whole lot of words like this, but there are enough to make the rule hopefully clear. You could add able to a verb to get an adjective. Kind of saw this a second ago, but you can add able to desire to get desirable. So desire is a verb, something you want. When you want something, rather, something which is desirable is something you want. It's a property of a thing that you would like to have. Squeeze, squeezable, so on and so forth. You're taking a verb, creating an adjective out of it. All right. Hopefully I've gone through enough repetition now that this is clear, and hopefully you're not totally bored, but if you are, sometimes boredom is good. What can I tell you? To accurately capture all the facts of word formation, tree structures should represent the lexical categories of all constituents at each node in the tree. So we've seen what sort of these branching structures look like and how they have nodes, and they lead up to a node at the top for the whole tree. But now we're going to label these nodes. So I'll give you an example here for reconstruction again. So we start out with this root construct. And then we will create the verb reconstruct out of it. So we're labeling not only each one of our morphemes, whether it's an affix or a verb for the root part of the word, but we're going to label each of the nodes that get formed along the way to creating the entire complex word. So first we go for the verb here, and then we add another affix ion to create a noun reconstruction out of that. Like I said, undesirable is kind of funny for a variety of ways, but showing you the structure that we saw before. Again, you can create an adjective out of a verb by adding a bold to it. So this is labeled as an affix. This is a verb, so you get desirable to make an adjective. And then you add un to that to create an adjective, basically meaning the opposite of whatever this adjective is. So undesirable is something you don't want to have. We'll be looking at a lot of exercises like these where we try to figure out what the tree structure is of some complex word. And already when I present this in class, I usually get questions about, well, how do we know what the order is? So this tree structure is giving you implicitly an order of how this thing is put together. It's saying, well, for reconstruction, you have to put these two together first to get the verb and then the noun. Why don't we do it the other way? And actually, I'm going to let you think about that for a second. Like, why isn't it construction and then adding the re afterwards to create reconstruction? Why don't we represent it that way? What do you think? It has to go back to these rules that these affixes have for attaching to other words to make new, more complex words. So you could take construct and add ion to it. That's fine, construct being a verb and construction being a noun. But you're stuck then at the end. So re is a word that attaches to verbs to create other verbs. It does not attach to nouns to create other nouns. So a construction is, you can have a construction, but a reconstruction is not a construction that happens again. You can reconstruct it, or you can construct something more than once, which is why you can take this verb and make it a verb. But on top of that, you can add ion to change the verb into a noun, but you can't take add it to a noun and get another noun. Sorry, that's just the way that it works, and I kind of stumbled through that, but it might be easier to kind of look at the opposite examples by scribbling them out on a piece of paper. That being said, if you can think of some other examples where you could, say, apply re to a noun to create another noun, and it would still work, then you're in kind of a different situation, but try to think of what examples are like that. So, like, example is a noun. Can you say re-example? Not really. That doesn't make any sense. So, Winnie the Pooh is still here. This is a bear. Bear is a noun. Can you re-bear something? That makes no sense either, right? Building the perfect beast. Okay, so we'll walk you through a couple of other test cases here. Let's look at reassignment, which is kind of a similar word. And normally, again, I would ask this in class, and somebody would kind of walk me through it. But like I said, it's going to be pretty similar to what we saw before, because we're going to take a verb, assign, and then we're going to reassign something. Kind of totally didn't write these out the exact way I wanted to. So reassign is a verb. Like first I assigned the homework to Billy, and then I reassigned it to Sue. And either way, when I did that reassigning, it was a reassignment. So I created a noun out of that verb reassign. The only difference here is this last affix here, meant, which again can attach to a verb to create a noun. And again, if you're confused about how any of these affixes might attach, you can try to think of examples of other English words where you find the same affixes. So just off the top of my head, like meant, what words end in meant in English? So like government and employment, so on and so forth, or assignment. Each one of those, you're taking a verb root, like govern or employ or assign, and then you're adding a noun to it, or you're adding meant to it to create a noun, right? Assignment, government, so on and so forth. So you can add that to this more complex verb, reassign, to get reassignment, but again, you would not be able to add re to a noun and get another noun. You can't re-example something. Yeah. The other part of this to remember is that each one of these nodes is a word by itself. So the kind of medial node here, the in-between step, you have the word reassign, which is a verb. Yeah. So every time you work through these steps, make sure you can get a word out of whatever process, whatever like structure you're trying to draw out at that point in the tree. I'll give you another more complicated example, miscategorization. And I'm going to pause here so you can think about what this tree diagram might look like as I get another drink of water. Pretty soon there will be no water in the glass. Then we'd be out of water, which would involve another preposition. Yeah, so miscategorization, that's a big word. There's a lot of morphemes in it. So the first thing I would actually recommend you do is try to figure out what are the morphemes. There's going to be some root in there, and then there'll probably be a lot of different affixes. What are the particular affixes? Once you identify what those affixes are, then I would recommend trying to think of a few other words which have similar affixes in them, and then try to figure out how those words are put together. Like what are the roots that the affix is attaching to, and then what is sort of the output of that process. What kind of lexical category do you get out of that process? So I'll let you think about that for a second as I kind of step through the answer to this particular one. But miscategorization itself has 4 different morphemes in it. Category is the root, and something funny happens here a little bit, and that we're kind of category has a Y at the end of it. That doesn't make it through the entire process in the way we spell it, or the way we pronounce it either. Don't worry too much about that, as long as you can identify the affixes which attach to it, which are mis, is, and ation, then you should be good to go. So the first thing you need to do is recognize. So yeah, first thing you should do is recognize that you're going to add affixes working from sort of the inside out. So if category is your root, you don't really need to worry about ation yet at this point in time, because you have to add either mis or is to it first. You kind of can't skip over morphemes, in English at least, and have like branches crossing each other in your tree structure at the end of the day. So either mis or is has to attach first. Which one do you do? We looked at is before with like vandalize, sermonize, so on and so forth. So we know that is can attach to a noun and then create a verb out of that. Mis, you might think, well, what kind of words can we attach mis to? Again, kind of working with the examples I mentioned just a second ago, like you can say maybe misgovern something or misuse something. Mis attaches to verbs and creates another verb out of it. So you're kind of stuck in this case. One of these processes will give you a noun or take a noun and create a verb out of it. The other will take a verb and create another verb out of the process. So if you were to say make miscategory as your first step here, not getting a response from my computer for some reason. Yeah, so if you were to create miscategory, then you'd have, if that were a word by itself, which it's not, then you'd have theoretically another verb, and you couldn't really attach is to it to get miscategorized, because is is looking for a noun. So miscategory is not really a word to begin with. That's why it's got a star here in front of it. Instead, you have to create categorize first and get this verb. Then you can add mis to it to create another verb. You still have kind of another decision to make here in your analysis. Can I add ation to this verb first, like categorization? That works as a word by itself, but mis, that would create a noun. So ation attaches to verbs to create a noun. You still need to attach mis somehow, and mis doesn't attach to nouns. It attaches to verbs. So this one needs to go in place first to give you miscategorize, and then at the end of the day, you can create miscategorization out of that for the noun at the very top. Yeah. So in each case, when you're adding affixes, make sure you can come up with other examples of that affix in English. You should be able to think of them and identify what lexical categories they're attaching to, what lexical categories are they creating. And then on the basis of your knowledge of those rules, you can write them out if you're not certain about how they go together. But write them out and make sure you can follow the steps through attaching all of the affixes to the root word until you get to the overall complex word here at the top of the tree structure. Yeah. Generally speaking, I'm not going to give you words which have more than one answer to how they should be represented in a tree structure, but that can happen. In this case, it's complex, but there's only one way through sort of the maze, as it were. But there are cases in language, some cool cases where we have complex words which have more than one morphological interpretation. So we're calling this sort of process of I'm going to call this process of putting morphemes together into a complex word a derivation of the morphological structure of the word. So different derivations can result in different interpretations for some words. And the example we'll walk through is the word unlockable. And I'll pause here for a second and say, what does unlockable mean? Think about it for a second. And then I will draw a analogy with this Necker cube here, which is artfully drawn thanks to the help of PowerPoint, because I could never do this on my own. But you can look at this cube here, which is not really a cube, it's just a two-dimensional thing, in two different ways. So maybe you see this as a three-dimensional cube, and this is the face in the front. Or maybe just by kind of switching something in your mind, who knows how it works, maybe this is the face of the cube that's in the front. And you can kind of go back and forth with that. Maybe it's this, maybe it's this. And that's kind of cool. And you can do the same thing with a word like unlockable. So the trick here is that un is a prefix that can attach to both adjectives and verbs. And able attaches to verbs and creates adjectives. So ultimately, you can walk through the derivation of this complex word in two different ways. So part one, we have these three morphemes, unlock, and able. And in this case, able attaches to lock first, and we get lockable. So something that is lockable, it's an adjective describing a door maybe, it's something you can lock. And if we add un to it at the tail end, then we're describing something which is not able to be locked. Okay, so remember, able attaches to verbs to create adjectives. Un can attach to an adjective and create another adjective. That's how the morphological process or derivation works here. And this one means not able to be locked. The other way to do this is to attach the first two morphemes together first. So for this case, you add un to lock, where lock is a verb, and if unlock is to open the lock for some door or something like that. So that's a verb. And then you can add able to that attaches to a verb and then creates an adjective out of it. So here you have unlockable, which means something that you can unlock. And these mean two very different things, maybe not exactly the opposite of each other, but they're not the same definition by any means. So this means you can't lock it, and this means that you can unlock it. Same word on the surface, unlockable, it has two different structures underneath. And we can talk about them both in a nice and concise fashion by creating these morphological tree structures to show that the differences in meaning come from the differences in the order of how you attach these morphemes together in the morphological derivation. Okay, so isn't that cool? One of the fun things about studying language is that you find that there's a lot going on underneath the surface of the words that we say, but that you have to know in order to be able to understand what a person is saying in order to be a competent speaker or user of human language. Okay, that's the moral of the story for today. Next time I'll walk you through some practice exercises. We'll We'll just do them as a group, hopefully online, and hopefully it will work, to get the hang of how to draw these tree structures and also how to do a little bit more morphological analysis of, say, languages that we don't know. Yeah, so that's it for today. I'll see you next time as well, and we'll start to look at sort of different morphological word formation processes aside from the ones we looked at before too. Okay, see you next time.